Good afternoon, friends. Stephen and Yana Banoon here with Israeli News Live, and we have our good friend Brian Rosenthal with us today and another episode. Brian was on with us, I think, on our first broadcast of coming out of Zionism, but we felt it'd be better to bring him back on and talk about it just personally, which we'll probably end up doing with each one of the other guests as well at some point in time, where they can share more of their thoughts more intimately about what they've gone through and how things have changed their lives. So, Brother Brown, we want to welcome you here to Israeli News Live and to share your thoughts. And of course, you have some pretty, very interesting, I should say, connections around the world too that makes this a little bit more personal for you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much. And so awesome to be with such a lovely couple and Christ-hearted, um, ministry-focused people that just want God's truth, God's love, and salvation to be available to all, and both Jew, Gentile, and Palestinian. So, yes, thank you. And I just want to open up with some initial thoughts about Zionism. Something's for folks, for the Zionist folks out there, and some are will actually identify that way. Some w will after maybe we have this discussion. And what we would ask is that you would prayerfully and biblically consider what we're saying and primarily the heart of what we're saying. And we like to believe that it's Christ's heart, which we want to convey today. So my heart and the heart and prayer of this ministry as former Zionists is to show solidarity with Christians, Orthodox Jews, former IDF soldiers, even Holocaust survivors that are against Zionism, which there are quite a few and they are growing, is to highlight the evil intent of the elites running Israel to establish a Palestinian free zone and later a Talmudic Noahide dominated one. As anti-Zionists, we are not promoting that Israel should not be a nation now, but as one that assimilates all people there, as democratic nation, Christians, anti-Zionists take the cues from Jesus to promote one nation that follows Jesus under the principles of love and yourself, and or love God and then your neighbor as yourself. And the neighbor goes both ways, Palestinians loving the Jews and vice versa. We believe Israel has the right to defend itself, like any group does. But in the case of October 7th, the satanic ruling Israeli elites, okay, we're talking about those who run the country, not the Jews who live there, uh, coordinated with Hamas and sacrificed their own people. And this would be both sides, whether it's
Yes.
Israeli or Arab, okay? And they Israelis actually chose not to defend Israel in this case, but left the door open for a pre-planned, premeditated attack. Now, one thing that Christians should not have in their vocabulary is the word anti-Semitism. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, you don't find the concept really in the Bible. The events that happened to the Jews or the nation of Israel, as God chose them to be the light of the world, his light, were done under his purview and with allowing them to do so. And now the book of Esther, folks could bring that up, but I would say that the Jews just happened to be the people that were being targeted just happened to be the people that were there. So I don't see that as a very good example. If you Google anti-Semitism, either in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, you only find references on Google that the New Testament or the Brit Hadashah would be possibly anti-Semitic and play a factor into the Noahide laws here later. It will play a factor. If you're a Christian Zionist or just somebody who holds the view that there's a non-biblical or unhealthy promotion of Israel, regardless of what they do, and you say the refrain of the most misquoted verse in the Bible, Genesis 12:3, and you call folks like myself, Steve and Yana, anti-Semitic, you give preferential treatment, love, prayers, and financial support to Israel, then you are unknowingly an unpaid foot soldier and promoter of so-called democratic state to which the Palestinians cannot even go to the same places you go to if you go to Israel, which many of you do. And if they marry, they have to pretty much stay in their area. And the Palestinians are not allowed to go pray at the Garden Tomb, bob in the Red Sea, or eat Peter's fish on the boat in the Galilee. Anti-Zionists or pro-all peoples come to saving grace of Yeshua, and I believe truly follow Jesus, not by showing preferential treatment, but praying for the peace of Jerusalem, Gaza, Ramallah, and Beirut. We believe in one Savior and one Lord solution, which correlates to Jesus' one kingdom establishment. And that's Acts 1, 6, and 7. That needs to be paramount if we're going to talk about a nation of Israel or a country in that area, is that Bible verse there. If we're going to use Old Testament verses to promote Israel, again, we wholeheartedly believe that it's a nation, but it should be a nation for all peoples there. But I happen to wonder sometimes if Ezekiel came back today, he would rip his clothes like he did back then when God called him to judge the nation of Israel and the people for a very good reason. And the reason would be no less than what Israel is doing today. Okay, and I think we all know whether it's abortion, the pride movement, and then the harassment and the killing of innocent Palestinians. And although I'm a big promoter of Calvary Chapel, which teaches verse by verse and has very good theology, but when it comes to Zionism, it's actually, from what a pastor told me personally, their doctrinal statement. And as I pleaded with this individual, he actually referred back to the Old Testament that the Jews had every right to carte blanche kill the Palestinians as they're doing today, which is false. That's further from the truth. And yeah, Ezekiel and many of the prophets would not have kind things to say if they were sitting in these Zionist churches today. So something to consider. So God hasn't forgotten the Jews. Something that maybe you have said, gets said often or thought. And that is why when you go to Israel, you need to love everyone you meet. Bless the Jews, Arabs, Orthodox Jews, Druze, and even some of the Christians with your money and the gospel. So we need to bless everyone. And something Jesus promises, you will surely be blessed by that. So it's not a single people group blessing that's available to you. So I pray that Christian ministries in Israel, the Christians in the IDF, which there are a few, would be the good Samaritans to which Jesus spoke himself, taking on the bloody Palestinian children into your arms, giving them medical care, feeding them, and most importantly, giving them the hope of the gospel, because they deserve Jesus just as much as you do. What would you think if Palestinians got saved, went into Israel and preached repentance, forgave the Israelis of their heinous deeds and exacting the same terror October 7th over 77 years? They've had October 7th for 77 years. Mm-hmm. And so to with that, it's really something that we have to think about. So if here's something to consider that, and it goes back to Jesus' time and when he came to seek those who were lost. And and I would have to ask the Zionists when they talk about the land, and yes, we realize there's many verses about the Jews coming back to the land, but God has preconditions, and it's conditional. Okay, it's not unconditional. God's support, and it wasn't in the times of the Tanakh or the Old Testament, and it's not today. But I would ask, is Jesus not enough? And John 3:16 obliterates the non-argument, because it really is, that the church replaced Israel, for Jesus replaced the Jews' need for a land. And why should they go to Israel to die and go to hell by the millions? And of course, if you believe the Schofield gospel, to which the Jews, all Israel be saved, well, Jesus' heart was, along with the disciples, was for the Jews to be saved right then and there. And so he would not take it too kindly. It wasn't his intent for years or centuries to go by and that the Jews did not accept him as the Messiah. What if all the Jews got saved today? Obviously that would throw that prophecy off. And let's say they left Israel to go to other countries to bring the gospel, much like the Apostle Paul did. So that here's another question: do you have to be from one of the 12 tribes to move to Israel? What if many converted Jews, which there are quite a few that are living in Israel, and that could give you a criteria. And actually, sadly, there have been many Christians who have converted to Judaism and moved to Israel and actually turned their backs on Jesus. But many probably don't know that if you are a Messianic believer, like myself, a Jewish believer in Jesus, you cannot move to Israel. You cannot make Aliyah. And so God would have to move the heart of the Orthodox director of immigration to allow for folks like myself and others to move to Israel. Now, Brother Steve and Yana often bring up the misquoted verse in the Bible, Genesis 12:3. And here is a very basic roadmap that I believe God wants Jews, and God bless you if that's your heart. If you have a ministry to the Jews and Jews specifically, and I've met some in Israel, but we need to love everybody, our neighbor as ourselves. But here's the roadmap really for Jews if we want God's prophecy to be fulfilled. And it starts with Genesis 12:3. Okay, we all know that verse. It goes to Zechariah 10:10 to 10:11, where God actually cut off Israel and said, more or less, it was a divorce type situation. And he said, you know what? I'm going to make a new covenant. And then we all know that comes from Jeremiah 31. So it's not like God was done with the Jews, but he had a new method to reach the world, to shine his light and declare his fame. We have Mark 11:10 to 14, which is the curse of the fig tree. In this, Jesus himself declares to the Jews, and of course, when I say that, I mean talking the elite Jews, the ruling class back then, which were the Pharisees, that he was done with the old system, okay, the sacrificial system, and the fact that there were people who were basically lording over the Jews of that time, what God wanted for them and how are they to worship God. We go to John 3:16. Okay, I'm going back to that, to where no, God's not done with the Jews because he so loved the world, he gave his life for everyone. Galatians 3:16, I call the bookend of Genesis 12:3. And basically that says he is the seed, singular, right? And so this is the fulfillment of Genesis 12:3. And then we get to Matthew 15:24, where Jesus went to the lost sheep of Israel. And then finally culminating at Acts 1:6 and 7. And this is a very important verse that we need to understand. What was Jesus' intent? If Jesus was intending to establish, or there would be a future state of without a king, which that verse contains, he would have said so. His disciples knew by then the Tanakh and all the verses that dealt with the Jews returning back to the land, and also Messiah, for they recognized Jesus as the Messiah. But here are things that they did not ask Jesus. They did not quote all the Old Testament verses of a nation being born in a day, of all the people coming back to the land. And it's interesting that Jesus did not bring that up. So when you combine the Jesus and his disciples who asked, when will your kingdom come? Okay. And by the way, Orthodox Jews, I would say we agree with them on this topic that there will be a coming kingdom where he will be a ruler. So I would say the fact that they don't recognize Israel, and I'm not giving license to that, but what I'm saying is they recognize what Jesus said, that his kingdom's not of this world. And if there would be a nation called Israel or regathering, he would be king, he being Jesus. So if you're now many Jews, rightfully so, and when I was a Zionist, this was a great concern of mine, and this is really ingrained in Zionists. And I think yet Stephen Yana, I'm sure you felt this way too for a long time, that you're concerned about another Holocaust. And
Mhm.
hence, anytime anything about Israel, the Jews, is mentioned, it's going to come across negative, attacking, and lend itself to another Holocaust coming. But the thing that Israel and quite a few other countries have no recognition of the Armenian genocide and many of those that happened in the Middle East. So
Yeah,
with that, just kind of opening comments.
there's a lot that can be said. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that when Israel talks about going back to the land and they say that this is our homeland, this is where we come from. And yet, 2,000 years ago, Israel was not in control of this land. For 63 years, it was controlled by Rome. Even when Cyrus, the Cyrus cylinder that put out the decree that he was returning the people back to their land, he didn't specify Jews only. If you actually go and read what it says, he actually says all the peoples. And that included the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, and they were all from the very same region of the world that Israel was from. These were the very peoples that Israel had come in. They never conquered fully. The Nephilim, they intermingled among them. They had children by them.
Well, God had law, and he had law by resident aliens too. That's why he put that law in his law, because there were mixed people there.
Well, there's one
And
thing
people
that
forget that there was never exclusively Jewish state ever. It was
Mhm.
always
it's,
resident
yeah.
alien there. So,
Well, there's one thing that we're forgetting, though, that's the most important of all, and this is really more for Christians that are listening today that are supportive of Israel. The promise in Genesis 12 was when God gave that promise, blessing Abraham and those that curse Abraham, and as we know, that was fulfilled at the time when Pharaoh and of course the other king wanted Sarah. They wanted to take her. But the other thing is that we're still leaving out is the fact that he says to Abraham that you will be a blessing to all families of the earth. Actually, not only families, but he even uses goyim, all the families of the earth. The only time in the lineage of Abraham's children that passed down to where finally all the families of the earth were blessed was through Jesus Christ. It was through the gospel. It was when finally Abraham's children started taking the gospel to the rest of the world. That was truly the fulfillment of it. And so therefore, to even for Christians today to be supportive of Israel coming back to the Middle East and creating their own homeland and driving out the occupants is the worst thing that they could have ever done. Is because they had no right to do that.
Yeah.
Now at this point, because many of the inhabitants of Israel today were born there, they have a right to have a land there. But it really comes down to the only way you could do it. If you want to fulfill, if you want that true prophecy of Genesis 12, and of course it goes on down through the other children as well, the only way they could do this and be biblically accurate, since he was to be a blessing to all the nations of the earth through his seed, though. It wasn't through Abraham himself, it was through his seed.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it would have to be a multicultural nation that believed that that seed, Jesus Christ, was truly fulfilling the prophecy, and that it would actually be a nation today that is a Christian nation. But instead, the Zionist movement of Christianity has come out so blatantly to say, well, Jesus is our God, Yahweh is their God, and we just can't mix the two.
And we
Yeah.
can,
It's become a
they're
mess.
saying that all the Christians have to attach themselves to the Jews and be taught by their rabbis. I mean, literally, that's where they're going,
Time for
heading.
B complex. I don't fall
yeah.
asleep.
But anyway,
Yeah.
I need to ask you, brother, please tell us a little bit about yourself before Zionism. How how hardcore Zionist you were? Did you even realize you are Zionist? You probably did. The reason I'm asking is because a lot of brothers and sisters are saying, well, you know, I was Christian and I thought that's the proper theology because that's how they were brought up, you know, in churches. And they don't even realize what the word Zionist mean, what it meant. So they didn't realize they are Zionists. So how about you? You were Zionist, knowing you are a Zionist, how active you were in pro-Zionist activities. Tell us about that.
Well, I called myself a rabid Zionist. Okay. And not I was on to compete with anybody, but I don't know if I could have gotten more Zionist. Okay.
Right.
A little background for me. My dad's Jewish. He's the son of immigrants that fled the pogroms. Okay. I have just like Brother Steve, I've lost relatives or distant relatives in the Shoah or Holocaust. I have relatives in Israel and some are in the IDF right now. But I never adopted Judaism, wasn't really promoted growing up. So on my road to Zionism is after I got born again, I started watching, I was so hungry for the word and I read the word verse by verse. And but I used to watch CBN, TBN, and through those shows, and pretty much if you're in Christian television, you have to promote Israel. But then Grant Jeffries, the late great Planet Earth. It's just slowly but surely it started to grow on me or grow in me, and I wasn't seeking after it. My Jewish identity didn't prompt me to do that. But I went to visit my brother in Israel. My brother was studying there, and from there it was my first exposure to Israel. Being there, it started to get birth in my heart, and then the idolatry of idolizing the Jews and really, and it's almost like a worship of Israel, giving favoritism. And I had a few trips to Israel, and I actually got to serve with many ministries there, Chosen People, Jews for Jesus, the Church King of Kings. You probably know about them, and giving out food. Actually, in 2000, I helped Calvary Chapel minister to the Lebanese as they were coming out of Lebanon. You know about Israel pulling out of Lebanon. And I flew two Jews from Russia to Israel to immigrate. Um, I got to give out apples and honey for Shana Tova, with the ministry there. While I was in Israel, I actually bought meals for soldiers. And through Calvary Chapel, being very Zionistic, there was a brother there who had ministries to where you could go and reach out to the IDF soldiers, give them tracts, buy them lunch. And so I used to do things like that. So slowly but surely, it just overwhelmed me from many different fronts. But I just couldn't get enough. One time I was in a Bible study called JCOM, Jewish Community Outreach, and we really didn't do outreach here, but they did do the trips to Israel. God prompted me to pray for the Palestinians and for pastors in Gaza and in the West Bank for Christians. And now this is very unusual because, and I would ask anybody, even yourselves, if you ever heard anybody pray for the Palestinians in a Bible study or a church environment. I haven't. And afterwards, two fellow Zionists, and we were so Zionist, we would stand up, say the Shema, Israel, heading east. you know, and
Of a mind.
everything was seen through the eyes. We were Hebrew roots light.
Okay.
You know, we still promoted Jesus, and everybody needed to get saved, but obviously the favoritism and the focus of our energy and time and money was for the Jews.
Hmm.
And um, but these two brothers came up to me afterwards. One of them is he's been to Auschwitz and Dachau and Yad Vashem, and he's very well known in uh, giving speeches or talking and commemorating on behalf of Christians, and you know, which we should do. Any genocide, Holocaust, you know, whether it's you know, what happened in Vietnam and Laos and stuff, a mass killing of anybody should get our attention and our heart. But they thanked me for praying for the Palestinians, and it was first for them too. So God showed me there that you know, it really overtook me, and I had single focused loyalty to one group. I attended the Night to Honor Israel, and where Dennis Prager, and of course the darling of Zionism, John Hagee, and they would regurgitate, you know, God bless will bless you, He blesses those that bless the Jews, and there would be a dancing Israeli dancers. They would have the song and get you pumped up with Mashiach, Mashiach, you
Right.
know, which is a great song, but we need to let people know who that Mashiach has come and will come again, and he's available to everyone today. Something I'm ashamed about, and we all have our shame for this, but God's forgiven us. I've actually repented of Zionism, which I encourage everyone to do.
Amen.
And I marched for Israel. And so they do this every year. Imagine every city does this, but and you can imagine every city of Palestinians that have pictures of their loved ones who have died. And as we would pass by this little group, somber, sorrowful group, I really felt like the Pharisees. You know how, like, even in Israel today they're spitting at Christians.
Hmm.
I really felt it in my heart. That's how that's without committing the act. That's how I felt. And now it breaks my heart
Right.
that that was my attitude.
Hmm.
And now I wish I would have stopped in the thousands and got out of line and given them a hug and say, please forgive us.
Right.
Please forgive me,
Yes,
you know?
amen.
Yes.
Amen.
And but but yeah, so anything and everything Zionism, whether it was a Bible study, a ministry I could give to, I actually served with Sarel or Volunteers for Israel, and you know, went to a base, ate their food, and ministered with them. Thought it was an extra special blessing. And here's something that's very disturbing that you guys have heard, and I know I've heard. There are Christians out there that would go and fight for Israel right now.
Hmm.
I mean, regardless of
Yeah,
age, if you could give them an
exactly.
M16, they would do it. And you know, they wish they could live there and stuff like that, which is fine. But just a thing where it's kind of like Israel first over the government, over their brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yes.
You know, it's just very disturbing.
Yeah.
It is, Brother
And
Brian.
brother, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
I want to say that what you said about the apology to the Palestinian people and asking, you know, to forgive you, that's our sentiment as well. And we say the same thing. You know, Palestinians, please forgive us for the blindness of standing uh, with an Israeli government that was totally oppressing and still oppresses you to this day.
Yes.
And you know, and I'll never forget. We were at my doctor in Orlando, and I would go there, and he had a pharmacist there in his own office. He had his own pharmacy, and this young girl sat there, and she kind of looked like an Israeli, but she was Palestinian. And one day she says to me, she says, "You know, Steve, the thing I don't understand about Israelis, they hate us so much." She said, "But my family have been Jews long before they were." And I'd heard this before, that Palestinians 50% of the Palestinians are the original indigenous people of the land that the Romans allowed to stay there so that they could feed them. They had conquered the land. And she was one of those families. She said, and I asked her about that. So, what do you mean by that? And she says, my family, as far back as they can remember, have always told the story that we were the original Hebrews that lived in this land during the Roman conquest, and that our families did not leave because they were the farmers in the land. And she said, and to this day, we still do the same thing. And she said, but yet they hate us so badly. And that's sad. That's really, really, really sad, you know. And like yourself, my extended family, when me and Yana lived in Europe, we visited all the different places because I wanted to know what the Jewish people suffered during the Holocaust. So we went, I had family from Auschwitz and Dachau, so we actually went to every camp that there was, but we visited those specifically. And then I watch what's happening with the Palestinians, and I'm thinking to myself, the very horrors that happened to the Jewish people in these Holocaust camps in Germany and in Poland and many of the other countries, Austria, etc., is no different. It's the exact same thing today going on in Israel. Like they say that Gaza is the largest open air prison in the world, and people think, well, they had their freedom. No, they didn't. They had no communication with the outside world whatsoever. Israel controlled every border, every access. They determined when they got food, when they got water. I mean, everything was controlled.
The checkpoints, if you go to ifamericansknew.org, it explains everything.
It's horrendous, to say the least.
Yeah. So, Brian, when was your kind of first realization that something is off? Like kind of your first, because you described yourself as really as an avid Zionist. I mean, you did even more than we did for that cause. So, when was that minute that entered your heart that something is not right and you started doubting and kind of thinking different way?
Yeah, well, I want to give kudos or shout out to you guys because it was a few years ago I was watching your ministry and you know, kind of like as you guys are still purging this out of your system, you know, it really gave me pause for thought. This is going to sound strange, but I was taking my dogs for a walk and an inaudible voice got impressed upon me. He said, Brian, it's not about the Jews. And I didn't know what God meant by that. And of course, it's like, God, how could you even say that? You know, and they're your chosen people. And but through that, it's just God required me to have my heart break for everybody there. And the books you guys have recommended, The Holocaust Victims Accused, to which there's some horrific quotes that, again, when we talk about Israel and our issues with Zionism, we're talking about the what I call the Revelation 2:9 elites, okay? We're not, and everybody else are victims. By the way, that Israel will not be the same for a few generations because everybody there has a PTSD or trauma in one form or another. And the IDF, which everybody's lauding and applauding, they're going to come back just like we did from Vietnam. So people need to think about that. And by the way, I wouldn't recommend it, but they're showing their war crimes on TikTok. The IDF is, and my heart goes out to them. So slowly through that, God had me, you know, pray for the Palestinians, and but yeah, then I really Galatians 3:16 is what really stood out to me, which was I say the bookend. That's how I refer to it. You know, when I thought about what replacement theology, how actually just the thought is ridiculous because through Jeremiah 31, God promised that there would be a new covenant. And then I started to realize, you know, that God that veils himself, and his brother Steve answered, I had never heard this before about Jesus coming to the lost sheep and tribes of Israel. I was like, okay, that answers that. you
Right.
know, and I know
Right.
you're going and answering all those questions. Um, but also the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians by Elon Pape, which incredibly how many people are coming to the truth through that book. And God bless that guy. May he open his eyes to Jesus through that. Because it's just horrific what happened. And again, that I feel for, I mean, that they will answer to God for their crimes for those. And what I heard it happen, you can elaborate, but as I study the history of when Israel became a nation, and how Holocaust survivors would come off the ships, and when they get smuggled in, they pretty much give them a gun and tell them, well, okay, go claim your land, or you're going to help us, And so talk about adding insult to injury, and they're already traumatized, they're already angry, have an axe to grind against somebody. Of course, who's there to take it out on but the Palestinians? And of course, they have to live with that. And so it's just a shame that they were capitalized or utilized for that. But But yeah, um, so pretty much, yeah. And then I'm reading book. I want to get to the book right now about the transfer agreement to
Hmm.
show how Hitler's involvement in elitist Jews. I want to say, I know there was a Nazi leader, and I think it was Eichmann that actually went with. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a prominent Nazi and his wife that went with a Zionist couple to Israel to look into the transfer agreement of transferring the German Jews to Israel and give them the possibility to sell their goods and then rebuy German goods when they got to Israel. So the sordid plan, has is nothing of God. So if I tell you it, as you guys have been interviewing rank and file Jews and those coming who are Orthodox, Jews are waking up to this fact that and they're not saying Israel shouldn't exist. They're just saying it was not established by God, and they don't even have the Holy Spirit nor the New Testament.
Right.
Right.
And it's just amazing that they're coming to that conclusion. And so
Well, you take in the case of Simone Zimmerman. She's a young woman, I don't know, probably close to around 30 years old. She was in the IDF, and I've seen her on Al Jazeera is where it caught my attention. And she was in the IDF. She was very, very pro-Israel. And she said the one thing that they had taught them is when you go back to the United States and you attend universities there, you have to teach the people there about the pro-Israel, that that we have a right to exist. So they were there to infiltrate also the universities and to spread the propaganda that was so embedded into their brains. Because really it's a militaristic state is what it is. You're indoctrinated through the military, through the education system. It's a very Zionist education system. Um, and then what happened, though, she said that when she got to the universities in America and she began to attend college there were Palestinians in those colleges. And she said, the next thing I know, I become friends with them, and then they begin to share with me all the horrors that their families had gone through. And she said, that's when it was a very cold, hard reality for me that we're not doing what we should be doing.
Well, a lot of these young people from Israel, they don't even know what Nachba is. They never heard about it
No,
because it's a prohibited word in Israel. They're not teaching about it. They don't even know what's in their backyard. I mean, Gaza is 20 minutes from Jerusalem, and they had no idea what's going on in there. They're just brainwashed that these are the terrorists, and they call all of them terrorists. So uh, when they do come, some of the thinking ones, the critically thinking ones that have a heart actually, and just like you said, not even Holy Spirit, just logic and basic common human principles. And then they see this and they realize we've been lied to with our education system, with the government. They don't like that. And what is wrong here in America is that a lot of Christians are not open to hear other Jews, other Israelis speak. They will only hear one kind, the one that they hear in their church, and that's it. They don't listen to Gideon Levy. They will not listen to Ilan Pape. They're not going to listen to Miko Peled. And they need to be exposed to those Jews. They're also Jews, but they're not hearing them. So listen to both sides and be like a judge, listen
Yeah.
to both sides and then make up your mind,
Yeah.
because they have no idea. They have been lied to.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I have a few closing thoughts.
Okay.
So if it's okay.
Yeah.
So, we need to realize the Jews in Israel, their greatest enemy is the same as our enemy, is Satan. And
Yes.
he wants their soul. And and here's a question, perish the thought, but could it be, let's say we give people the Zionist argument that Israel is of God, it was designed by him, that could be God judging Israel right now. If we take the immorality and idolatry that Israel's going through. So if you want to have that stance, then you also have to consider, because God's a righteous and holy judge, and he's not going to change his position today when he never did that in the past. To address God's people saying the Jews are God's chosen people, if you go to Habakkuk 2:4, the Jews have always been the faithful, and so those who live by faith, and of course we go to Ephesians 2:4, 8, and 9. So it's always been about that, Now people like to talk about Romans 11. That's kind of like their big verse or chapter they come up with to validate. Well, I went through it recently, and taking into fact about the tree being cursed and the Zechariah 11:10-11, to me, I really see where God makes it clear in Romans 11 that he's actually saying that that branches can be cut off, and the ones that are grafted in are faith. Okay, so not all Gentiles are grafted in, believing Gentiles are, and not all those who are part of the tree are just Jews through their lineage. So when I think of the Apostle Paul in his faith, I see him as a very humble guy. We got to consider this guy was the Pharisee of Pharisees, or religious leader, but in essence, he didn't really deny his heritage, but as time went on, his heritage became less and less, so Jesus could become more and more in his life. And that would be his heart. And I would say, what we would want to communicate to people, if you are Jewish and let's say you were cut up in Zionism like I was, Jesus really wants to give you a new identity. And that's a follower in him. So, when with that, sometimes I think, and this, I just thought of this today, and I don't know, I've never heard this said before. I wonder if the thorn in Paul's flesh could be the fact that he struggled with his Jewish identity and that becoming prominent, and the fact of his position and what he was before, and how he had to abdicate that and become less and less, to become a follower of Jesus. It's not like he denied being Jewish, and nobody should deny being Native American or Arab or Jewish or what have you. But when you become a follower of Jesus, that should envelop you so much, whatever your skin color or your identity is, becomes really a non-issue.
Right.
So sometimes I think God in his grace is preserving the Palestinians, speaking of thorn, to be a thorn in the side of the Jews, to remind them to do as Moses, as Brother Steve just said, to care and love for their neighbors as they want to be treated. So if you want a perspective of why the Palestinians are still there, because they could have easily been wiped out by now. So is God protecting the Jews in Israel, which we've heard quite a bit, and I have said, well, here I'm going to throw a different take. Maybe God is protecting the Palestinians, especially that he has his chosen faithful believers, disciples, following him. I think of the Liberty ship, of how God protected them from sinking, answering the prayers of the sailors who were being attacked by who? The chosen people. And I mean that in jest or quote unquote. I pray for believing soldiers of the IDF that they will give, and I'll post this a lot of times on these Zionist links. I don't need to mention a certain pastor, but I post and I say, hey, why don't you encourage the IDF soldiers to go and be the Good Samaritan and bring food and the gospel and water to be a light to your fellow soldiers and be example, okay? Which we're all called to be. We cannot choose sides. We are disciples without borders. If you are a follower of Jesus, you're a disciple without borders. So basically, when you hear
What a
something like,
beautiful phrase. We are disciples without borders.
Yes.
yes, and many Jews are waking up, as Yana, her interview with Mrs. Glass, encourage you people to watch that. You know, all of us have been indoctrinated into Zionism. As you know, many Jews, to include my dad, when I speak of these things, the PTSD that he has is really the installation and brainwashing of the fact that there could be another Holocaust and that we must fight, and there seems to be almost a depression or an emotional reaction when we speak about these things. And I believe a lot of that is from the programming of movies, as good as Schindler's List
Mhm.
and Fiddler on the Roof and the Boy with Striped Pajamas.
Yeah.
As good as they are, and they highlight the evils of the Nazis and what happened in the Holocaust. But by the same token, we need to be careful not to get so emotionally taken in that that it affects us and we have that reflexive reaction to where we can't hear people like yourselves. Um,
They should
and
make a movie, Brian. They should make a movie where, like on the case of victims accused, Holocaust victims accused, they should make a movie like that where they show clearly, it's been in court cases where they abandoned their own people and allowed them to go to the Holocaust in Auschwitz there when they could have rescued the entire lot of them and not lost a single soul for the exact same price they paid for only, what was it, 8,000, I think they rescued instead. Um, it's a crime. It's really a major
They
crime.
needed that. They wanted that.
Well,
And
they said
they
it. That's
knew
what's
they
written
had
in the book.
a plan that they're going to basically use that for in the future,
That's
so
what's happening with
they
October
can
the
play
2nd.
victimhood. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that way it's emotional. And so they arranged it that way, gave their own people to death
Did you
so they
know
can have the Holocaust happen the way it did. But
40% right now, there's 40% resigning from the IDF reservist because of PTSD. And I can only imagine when this is all said and done, those that are going to come out and they will talk about the horrors they faced as they kill these women and children. You can't go through war and have something like that happen, especially when a child's involved. And I actually knew someone personally that went through that. I won't call their name, but they personally, during the Iraq War, was going into Fallujah and had to kill a little boy so that he wouldn't awaken all the soldiers to end up into a big fight. And that traumatized him so horribly bad um, that he did that, but he says either that or we'd all be killed. And but he said, I still can't live with myself. He said he was just a boy,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And so
you
just
can't
imagine the
murder.
snipers and
Yeah.
everybody, that's what I say about Israel. They say they were fighting Hamas, but that sniper knows good and well that that's a child he's just putting that scope on and pulling the trigger on. And then I saw that little girl in the Twitter video, and she had just been shot right in the neck. They had the patch. They were trying to stop the bleeding and just pushing, pulsating through the rag and everything. I think that little girl survived. By the grace of God, she survived. But I sit there and I've seen so many videos, of these little children screaming and crying. How much more do we have to go through?
Yeah. And as I follow, and I don't have the numbers, and it may be something you would know, that I would venture to say that more Israeli IDF have died than Hamas.
I
And
know
just
that Israel does keep the numbers down, but mainly where the IDF are dying right now is in direct hand-to-hand combat in Lebanon, not so
okay.
much with Hamas. They have, it's hard for Hamas to be able to fight when they're being bombed every day, every city, every building. And now I hear that Tyre has been leveled to the ground practically. And that really concerns me because I'm sure that some people want to think, oh, that's biblical. They're going to be destroyed. Jesus clearly said that if Tyre would have heard the things that you did, and Sodom had heard the things that you did, they'd be standing to this day. They would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. So we know from Jesus's comment, Tyre had already been destroyed. So the people of Tyre today, maybe they're descendants of the king that supported King David and King Solomon. But the point is this city at one time stood with the Jewish people. Why would they destroy these people?
Yeah.
And that's
And
apartment
Well, did
buildings.
anybody even think of that this is just agenda of those who say they're Jews, but they're really not? We know that Netanyahu is Milekowski, he's Polish, European. He's not no way from original Israelite Hebrews. And when you look at Trump's son-in-law, okay, just Google what he said about Gaza, how he actually years ago was promoting the idea to kill Gazans and buy off the land over there. So look into money. Who is buying off these lands?
Yeah.
What are they going to do in Gaza?
Mike Huckabee just got named,
So
by
this
the
is
way.
nothing about Bible or biblical prophecies. They're using them to get an agreement of Christians in the name of God to go and get that land so they can use it for their own elite purposes. And this is what's said about it, that they're doing it on blood of the innocent. And yeah.
You know what's really weird is I just saw where Mike Huckabee just got named in Trump's administration to be the ambassador to Israel. And I used to think very highly of Mike Huckabee, especially when I was a Zionist, but I hadn't really ever paid attention. Oh, I just knew that he always supported Israel. So after I got out of Zionism, I hadn't really gone back and listened to him. And just before I found out he was nominated to be that position, there was, I just seen a couple of days before where he was stating, they were talking about Israel, and he says, there is no such thing as the West Bank. He said, it's Judea and Samaria. He said, and there is no such thing as Gaza.
Right.
He said, this is Israel, right? And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this man is setting the rest of the world up and setting the Christians that have followed this man to be willing to go in there and obliterate the rest of the Palestinians and drive them out of this land.
yeah. Well, one thing I think about, and when I go back to Zionist Schofield prophecy, and then Zelensky's comment about making Ukraine greater Israel. And I know you had mentioned this, and this is what we need to pray against, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but if the elite Revelation 2:9 Jews can sacrifice their own during the Holocaust for Israel, would they do the same for current state of Israel?
Yeah.
And somehow their operation, their regime moves to Ukraine, and of that matter, and it just I perish the thought. I don't want to think about it, but it just seems to me as I see the way the battle is going, and I don't want to see carpet bombing or anything like that, but it just seems to me that the leadership isn't caring about the people. I mean, they're going in and out of bomb shelters a few times a day. They are stressed to the max. Their economy's taken a huge hit. 2 million people will probably never come back. So Israel, I would venture to say, will never be the same.
Right. Right. It can be undone. Damages cannot be undone no more. And
The
I
only way,
wonder,
the
you
only
know,
way they would be able to come out of this is if they are. My concern is, I will say this, I have a feeling that Putin and Trump are going to join forces together when he comes into office. And although Putin has appeared to be somewhat a good guy, you got to remember, he's already set in the anti-Semitism laws in Russia. He threw out all the right-wing Jewish oligarchs and installed all the Chabad oligarchs instead. Uh, these two big nations could come together and financially support Israel in a way that they've never been financially supported before, and maybe even force Europe to do reparations for Israel. So I have a feeling, I don't really know what to think, because I mean, a lot of people talk about the 10 kings and things like that, but somewhere along the line, Israel is going to be set up as a beacon of light to the world, even though they've just massacred people by the tens of
but it will
thousands.
be for
16,000 children have died in Gaza now.
right. It will be for a short time, though, I believe. If it happens, it will be brief and destruction is assured because their sins reached heaven. I mean, there is no way what I'm watching that's happening in Gaza that God can continue this and allow this. And there is so many people waking up right now. And even though Christians, a lot of Christians disagree in certain doctrines or whatever, but a lot of them are waking up on that issue of Israel. And it is more, I know that a lot of them are supporting Israel. That's true. But at the same time, a lot of them are waking up. So it's been a separation, literal separation right now is going on. So anyway, Brother Brian,
Before you
want to say
close,
anything?
let me just say
Okay.
one more thing on this here. When it comes to Israel, there is prayer seriously needed especially for the Jewish people there that have questions in their mind, that
Yeah.
realize something is majorly wrong.
Yeah.
Even the families that have the hostages there, Netanyahu knew. They knew because the Egyptians even published it. They already knew 200 to 250 hostages would be taken. They sacrificed their own people, and these families are not stupid. They're starting to get what happened. They knew they were disarmed. Sderot, by the way, used to be a Palestinian town before the Nakba. Those same Palestinians, when the 1948, before the independent war there, when the Jewish people, the fighters that were going to fight to try to bring about independence, they were hiding them from the British so they would not be killed. Right there in Sderot. They hid them in their homes so that the British would not find them, cared for them. And when the British had left, then they let them go, only to come back on that fateful day and have every one of them murdered by the very same people they protected. These are things that people don't know about.
Yeah. Well, Brother Brian, thank you so much for being here with us today. You have brought very interesting points. In fact, I want to call this video, "We Are Disciples Without Borders," because you kind of gave us
Put in the
this.
description that
Yes.
Brother Brian coined this statement for us.
Yes, and of course, and it will be anti-Zionism, not anti-Zionism, but how, story
out of
story
Zionism.
of Brian Rosenthal, if you don't mind, and thank you, and we can have you back again. And I'm reminding all those who were with us and they want more points that they forgot, just email me, Israeli News Live at protonmail.com. And I have a lot of others that I have to schedule. So there is quite a few people that are interested in coming and speaking about how they came out of Zionism. So that will be very encouraging, because a lot of people are thinking in their communities, well, I'm alone, everybody's against me, my whole own family is against me, and I had to come out of church because they're all about Israel and nobody can see it, and they're calling me heretic. And so it's so important that you come and speak your mind and tell your story so you can see that you're not alone. We are just scattered, but we are together, okay? And there is many of us. So that's very important. And thank you, Brother Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You will be very welcome to come back again, and we truly appreciate you.
Thank you very much. And תודה רבה.
תודה רבה, brother.
Kusanum.
Kissenham, yes. All right. Well, have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.